Welcome to the Ultimate Gaming Realm, and this is your curator, Dixon, logging on.
Resident Evil
1996. Resident Evil, also known as Biohazard, introduced a new shock value in the gaming world in 3D on the Sony PlayStation. But in 1998, the shock value increased even more with a true satisfied sequel, Resident Evil 2, also known as Biohazard 2.
A bizarre incident occurred in the outskirts of an American suburb called Raccoon City. It was later revealed that the terrible disaster had been caused by the T virus, a mutagenic toxin created by the international enterprise Umbrella Incorporated for use in bioweapon experiments. The Raccoon City Police Department's Special Stars Unit immediately began investigation in the affair. The case was apparently closed, thanks to the efforts of STARS members Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine. But the Umbrella Corporation's experiments were far from finished.
Before we go any further into the game, let's see how Resident Evil 2 was in the beginning of development. The development for Resident Evil 2 began after the completion of the first Resident Evil game in 1996. Resident Evil 2 is pretty much like the first game: survival, exploration, puzzle solving, backtracking, and investigating the surrounding of the incident. And like the first Resident Evil game, Resident Evil 2 has an option between two protagonists. But unlike the predecessor, which Chris or Jill each have a linear story of their own, Resident Evil 2 mainly focuses on the zapping system, which provides each character with unique storylines and obstacles. So practically you have to play through Resident Evil 2 with both characters to know the true end. You can either start out with one of the characters of your choice and finish the story with the other character. And each character has their own disc, which is another way of saying Resident Evil 2 is a 2 CD-ROM disc game. The development team took around 40 to 50 people and almost 2 years to fully complete Resident Evil 2. In fact, the early prototype of Resident Evil 2, which is now known as Resident Evil 1.5, the original release date for the original concept of Resident Evil 2 was set for March 1997, but the developers were not satisfied with the current state of the game, so they decided to start over from scratch. The original story for Resident Evil 2 was going to be set in or near the police station. The protagonist from the original plan was going to be a rookie police officer by the name of Leon S. Kennedy, and the other protagonist was a college girl returning to Raccoon City at the wrong place at the wrong time, if you ask me. Her name was Elsa Walker, which Elsa was meant to join up with other survivors to help escape. But most of the early concept has changed. It took the developers 9 months to make it to the final version. A playable demo of Resident Evil 2 was released as a bonus disc, with the Resident Evil Director's Cut released in September of 1997, while the full Resident Evil 2 game is being finalized. The playable demo was incredible, and I can tell that they were nearly done with the project. And I can tell Resident Evil 2 is going to be better than the predecessor. In the demo, you can only play as Leon Kennedy, but when I played through the demo, I didn't see any reference of Elza Walker. But I see another name that comes to mind when I entered the STAR's office in the police station. The STAR member, protagonist, and survivor from the first game, Chris Redfield, left a diary on his desk about his ongoing investigations since the mansion incident that he doesn't want his sister, Claire, to know about or get involved in any way. Then shortly after he read the diary, a female shot at me, and when I could see, that wasn't Elza. And then that's the end of the demo. What's going on? Well, as I mentioned, since they scrapped the original idea, which means a lot of changes surrounding the game occurred. That includes the story, the characters, the creatures, the environment, and the protagonists. As I already know, Leon S. Kennedy, the rookie police officer, still remains. But Elza Walker was also scrapped and replaced by Claire Redfield, the sister of STAR member Chris Redfield. And Claire's main occupation was a college student, and her main purpose in Raccoon City was to look for her brother, Chris. Now the full game and finalized version of Resident Evil 2 was released on the PlayStation in January of 1998. Resident Evil 2 was released exclusively on the Sony PlayStation at that time on 2 discs. Disc 1 represents Leon, and Disc 2 represents Claire. And Resident Evil 2 relies on the story being the zapping system type. You can start out as Leon and finish as Claire, or you can start out as Claire and finish as Leon. Who you start with and who you end with is up to you, and then vice versa, the story will differ from the other. And just as I expected, Resident Evil 2 is better than Resident Evil 1 in every aspect. In fact, Resident Evil 2 became a fast-selling game all over the world, and since its release, sales continued to grow from there. Resident Evil 2 broke previous sales like Final Fantasy VII and Super Mario 64. Resident Evil 2 was a huge blockbuster in the video game market. The developers did the right thing by doing away with the original concept and rebuilding the game from bottom up. The developers put in much more thought into making this game more like a true element of a classic zombie horror film, like George Romero's Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. Resident Evil 2 plays pretty much like the first game, with the tank controls, the character's inventory menu, 3D pre-rendered backdrops, and polygon graphics. But practically everything in Resident Evil 2 had a major step up all around. With a graphical overhaul, the stiffness around the characters and enemy AI has been well broken out of. The characters and zombies are more realistic, and the physics all around the player and the AI, like when you get grabbed and bitten by a zombie while standing, you can shove the zombie into any zombies that are behind them, so that way you can at least clear a path. Or at times when you shoot a zombie, gunshots can push them back, if not finish them. Or when you use a powerful weapon against a group of zombies, or any multiple targets, you can do multiple damage to more than one creature with one shot. And the animation all around the playable characters and non-playable characters have been added with some realism. Like if you use a combat knife against a wall or an object, it feels more like you're actually stabbing the object. So the combat knife is an improvement, but still the weakest weapon in the game. And here's an awesome thing they added when using a shotgun. Sometimes you can split a zombie in half, but the top half will still crawl at you until you kill it completely. Now that's fucking badass. Another interesting thing about realism they brought in for playable characters is that when you get hurt, like down to caution or danger, you begin to hold your wound. So you don't have to go into the inventory screen to check on your health often, but when you get into danger, then you really begin to move slowly. Unlike the first Resident Evil game, Chris Redfield can hold only 6 items, and Jill Valentine can hold 8 items. But in Resident Evil 2, both Leon and Claire can hold 8 items. However, there is a side pack you can equip later in the game that allows you to hold 2 more items, which makes it total of 10 items to hold. But only one character can get a side pack, so it's up to you when using the first character in the first scenario to decide if he or she wants to either equip the side pack or save it for the second character. In that same locker, there's also a submachine gun, which really comes in handy. So let one character take one item and let the other character take the other. But it's up to the chosen character from the first scenario on what to do. And I think it would be better if player A takes the machine gun and leave the side pack to player B, because depending on how you solve and find things, there's another submachine gun that can be found later. And speaking of submachine gun, since it's a bigger weapon, the submachine gun takes 2 item spaces. There's also other weapons that can take 2 spaces as well. The flamethrower, the spark shot, and the rocket launcher. Like the first Resident Evil game, each character has exclusive weapons. Both characters can use a combat knife, the submachine gun, and the rocket launcher, and the Gatling gun. Leon's exclusives are the shotgun, the magnum, the flamethrower, and weapon add-on upgrades for pistol, shotgun, and magnum. Claire's exclusives are the bowgun, the spark shot, and the grenade launcher that uses 3 different types of rounds, the same kind Jill uses from the first game. And each character has pistol exclusive that uses the same ammo, and which allows you to start out with at the beginning of the game. The cheesy live-action full-motion video cutscenes that we saw at the beginning and at the end of the first Resident Evil game was replaced in Resident Evil 2 with animated full-motion video cutscenes. The voice acting in Resident Evil 2 sounds more convincing than the voice acting from Resident Evil 1. The first Resident Evil game took place all around a huge mansion, but in Resident Evil 2, the virus has been spreaded all around the whole town. Resident Evil 2 took place in September of 1998, 2 months after the mansion incident from the first Resident Evil. Leon Kennedy was just starting his first day as a police officer, and Claire Redfield just arrived in town on a motorcycle. Then all hell broke loose with this zombie outbreak. Then both Leon and Claire bump into each other, then escape in a police car trying to get to the police station. Until out of nowhere, a zombie pops up from the back seat, and both Leon and Claire try to struggle their way out, till they bump into a sign ejecting the zombie throughout the windshield. Then that transportation truck driver, who was bitten by a zombie before escaping into his truck, had turned into a zombie while on the road, and was coming right behind Leon and Claire. And then the gas transportation truck crashed into the police car, causing a huge explosion. But Leon and Claire escaped on opposite sides before the explosion hit. So they split it up from there, and they have to meet at the police station. Then the story continues on from there. But what makes you think the police station's gonna be any safer? Well, your guess is good as mine. Because what you witnessed in the mansion from the first game, you're about to witness even more deadly experiments. That Umbrella spread it out throughout the entire Raccoon City. Resident Evil 2 also introduced us to new creatures as well as some returning creatures, like zombies, crows, giant spiders, and Cerberus dogs, which I guess I can refer to these dogs in Resident Evil 2 as zombified police dogs. There are a few creatures they introduced in Resident Evil 2. And one of the most scariest and imitating creatures in the Resident Evil series by far, known as Lickers. They crawl, climb walls and ceilings, and do jump attack with their razor claws. These Lickers are armed with razor claws and piercing tongues, and they can be as much deadly as those hunters from the first Resident Evil game. But the Lickers can be easier to kill, but the Lickers can be more difficult to aim and get a clean shot at, since they don't stand and move around too much. Between the Lickers and Hunters, I would still say the Hunters are more terrifying. And speaking of Hunters, they're one of the Resident Evil 1 creatures that are absent in Resident Evil 2. Just like the Hunters, these Lickers can give me a jump scare surprise. They will come out through windows, come down ceilings, come out of vents, and etc. And like the Hunters from the first Resident Evil game, in Resident Evil 2, after you clear the hallways with zombies or dogs, they were later replaced by Lickers. Or in Resident Evil 2, depending on what scenario you're on, they can be in different areas. These Lickers are the type of virus creatures that really knows how to show an introduction into the Resident Evil series. There's also these Plant 43 creatures known as the Ivy Zombies, and they can whip at you with their deadly branches and spit poison at you, or if you're down to danger point, and if you're close enough to one of them, they can grab you and bite your head off. The recommended weapon to use on these Ivy Zombies, as Leon the flamethrower, or as Claire, the grenade launcher with flame rounds. Plant 43 was based off of Plant 42. Remember the giant plant from the dormitory in the first Resident Evil game? Well, as you can see between the two, both plants are totally different subjects. In one of the ventilations, you might come across a patch of cockroaches, and you want to run through them quickly. The giant spiders we saw in the first game are almost the same, except they're only crawling on either wall or ceilings. They don't bust out little spiders after you kill one this time, because these big spiders are mainly in sewers this time. A giant moth scared me only once, but the moth was easy to kill. And one of the biggest creatures in Resident Evil 2 you will come across is that huge-ass alligator. Much bigger than the ones that I witnessed in Tomb Raider. The alligator kinda has a similar pattern with the giant snake from the first Resident Evil game. If you defeat the snake the first time, it'll run away. Then the second time you fight the snake, you kill it. But with the giant alligator, if you defeat the alligator in scenario A, it runs away. Then when you face it in scenario B, you kill it. And there's also an alternative way of killing the alligator on scenario A. Use one of the cylinder gas tanks, let it drop to the floor, and when the alligator bites on it, then shoot at it. And you wasted the alligator completely. And if you went that direction, scenario B doesn't have to deal with the alligator. Now the main villain of the game, Dr. William Birkin. Birkin was an Umbrella research virologist who spent his life's work on this creation of the G-Virus. Prior to the city outbreak, Birkin was confronted by a military team known as Hunk, sent in from Umbrella to collect the G-Virus sample. Then Hunk gunned down Birkin and retrieved the case of samples. But Birkin injected the remaining G-Virus sample into himself and turned into the Golgotha monster. Then Birkin went after the Hunk members in the sewers, and the team tried to gun down Birkin in his new form, but Hunk were no match for the G-Virus monster. After Birkin eliminated Hunk, he ate the other G-Samples, but what's worse is that he destroyed the T-Samples, which leads the sewer rats to consume them, then polluted the virus through the city's water supply, and then spread it all around the entire Raccoon City. The Birkin monster was known as G. The G-Virus must be one powerful sample, because Birkin can turn into many different forms. The Golgotha monster is more advanced than the Tyrant monster that we've seen in the first game. Speaking of the T-Virus monster, the updated Tyrant, known as T-103 model, or Mr. X, was dropped off from a helicopter from a different branch of Umbrella near the beginning of Scenario B. Wearing a trench coat, you can easily defeat him. But after you walk out of the room, he gets back up. And you will encounter him time to time throughout Scenario B. But if you have a powerful weapon, it can always be easy to knock him down. But he keeps coming back. But after you knock him down, you can get ammo off of him, which is good. The business of this Tyrant's model was sent in to collect the remaining sample that's been well hidden by Birkin's wife, Annette, who is also another Umbrella researcher. Both William and Annette have an 8-year-old daughter, Sherry, who was found at the police station by Claire Redfield. Both Claire and Sherry gain each other's trust throughout both scenarios of Claire.
The man who developed the G virus is actually her father. What's wrong, Claire?
And in Leon's scenario, a woman named Ada Wan, who was the last thing we saw in the Resident Evil 2 playable demo. They cross paths the same way, but in the actual game, it's in the parking lot. And her occupation was to look for her boyfriend, John, who was another employee from Umbrella. She later found out he was dead and turned into one of those zombies. But something tells me that Ada's got other business here in Raccoon City. Every detail surrounding Resident Evil 2 from ground up is a mass improvement. Now this zapping system, I don't know why this is called a zapping system, which is this thing starting out with one character in the first scenario and finishing the second scenario with the other character to know the true end. It makes Resident Evil 2 much longer than any playthrough of either character's stories from the first Resident Evil. Both games have similar plots, like near the end where a facility is set to blow up within a matter of minutes. Then you have to face a super monster like the Tyrant and having a rocket launcher near the end to finish him off.
You lose, big guy.
But they add more to it with the true ending in Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 was one of the highest grossing games of 1998. There's been a lot of great games that came out on all platforms that year, except for the Sega Saturn, which was on the deathbed in the US, while still going strong in Japan. It's another way of saying that unlike the first Resident Evil game, the Sega Saturn did get a Resident Evil 2 release, sadly. However, many other console ports did, like Sega's next console and last console, the Dreamcast, and it was also ported on the PC, Nintendo 64, TigersGame.com, and the Nintendo GameCube. Now, during the same year with the PlayStation release of Resident Evil 2, Sony was upgrading their PlayStation controller to a DualShock controller. But later in 1998, shortly after the release of the DualShock controller, Capcom re-released Resident Evil Director's Cut and Resident Evil 2, with DualShock features being added. And they're both known as the DualShock versions. Now, as I mentioned in my previous Resident Evil video about the DualShock version of the first game, that the only thing they got going for it was the analog and vibration option. Other than that, since they already re-released the first Resident Evil game, they messed the DualShock version up even more. But the DualShock version of Resident Evil 2 was awesome. Not only it had DualShock upgrades, it also has newer range mode with extra weapons, along with original Resident Evil 2 mode. And the DualShock version of Resident Evil 2 is available on the PlayStation Network for the PlayStation 3. There's not much more to tell you about Resident Evil 2, except it was a huge blockbuster in the realm of gaming and survival horror. And it's one of those games that made it to multiple platforms around that time after the PlayStation release. Now, just like the first Resident Evil game, Resident Evil 2 is still a true survival horror classic that holds up today. And now it's 2019, there was a recent release of the Resident Evil 2 remake for current generation consoles and PC. And that one was fucking bloody awesome. I'll get into that one someday.
So, it's finally over. Sherry, you look terrible.
No worse than you, Claire.
Come on, time to leave.
Now? What's wrong? Is something following us?
We have to go. We don't have any time to waste.
Go? Where?
Hey, it's up to us to take out Umbrella.
To conclude the Raccoon City PlayStation trilogy, next Resident Evil video will be on Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. Until the next time, this is Dixon of the Ultimate Gaming Room, logging off.